At the end of December 29th, 1944, at around 23:40, 26-year-old Major Carroll C. Smith was hunched in the cramped cockpit of his P-61 BlackWidow, orbiting over McGuire Field on the island of Mindoro, while his radar operator tracked an approaching contact. 43 combat sorties, 4 confirmed kills. And that night, 12 Japanese bombers were inbound to wipe out the American airstrips. For the past 2 weeks, Mindoro had been hit every single night. 334 air raid alerts in 14 days. American engineers were building 2 airfields to support the Lingayen Gulf landings. Once completed, those strips would let U.S. fighters cover the entire invasion force, and Japanese commanders knew it. So they sent everything they had into the darkness. Conventional bombers, kamikazes, any machine that could carry explosives. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron had only arrived at Mindoro 3 days earlier, on December 26th. Their mission was simple: protect 20,000 American troops, construction crews, and unfinished runways from night bombing. Smith felt the pressure in his bones. A single bomber slipping through meant dozens of dead men, weeks of delays, and far more casualties on the beachhead. Smith's aircraft, the P-61 BlackWidow, was unlike anything the Japanese had faced. It was America's first combat plane purpose-built for night fighting. A 66-foot wingspan, twin 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, a top speed of roughly 366 miles per hour. But its true weapon wasn't the 4 20mm cannons. It was the SCR-720 radar in the nose, capable of spotting aircraft out to 5 miles in total darkness. Japanese bomber crews flew at night, believing the darkness made them invisible. That night, they would discover how wrong they were. Lieutenant Philip Porter sat in the compartment behind Smith, eyes fixed on 2 radar scopes. Any subtle heading or altitude change, any blip edging closer, he read it and translated it into calm, precise vectors for Smith. The situation, though, came down to a brutal equation. 1 P-61 against 12 bombers. Attacking one target meant giving the rest more time to reach the airfields. No matter how skilled Smith was, he'd be racing against math as much as against the enemy. He'd spent 18 months preparing for this. Night fighting school at Orlando Army Airfield in Florida, radar interception drills, instrument flying, and gunnery in pitch-black conditions. The 418th had first gone operational in 1943 over New Guinea, flying P-70 Havocs and radar-equipped P-38 Lightnings. The P-60s hadn't arrived until September 1944. But when they did, they were a revelation. Stable, powerful, forgiving, and with radar that actually worked. But even good radar didn't make this particular night any easier. Smith's fuel would last maybe 3 hours at best. If each engagement took 10 minutes, he'd only be able to intercept 3 bombers before having to return to base. The rest would get through. And that meant burning tent cities, wrecked runways, and dead engineers. At 23:42, Porter reported 4 separate contacts simultaneously. 4 targets, 4 different altitudes, all converging on Mindoro. Smith had to pick an order, which bomber to take first, and how much risk to stack on top of that decision. Genius or suicide? He'd only know afterward. He shoved the throttles forward. The P-61 clawed into the clouds at 2,000 feet per minute. The scopes showed a target at 4 miles. Outside the canopy, there was nothing but black. No moon, no stars, and thick cloud, exactly why the Japanese had chosen this night. But Smith's radar cut through it all. The first target was a Mitsubishi G4M Betty, a bomber Allied crews knew all too well. Fast and long-ranged, but cursed with unprotected fuel tanks that turned it into a flying torch. As the range closed, Smith still had no visual until, at about 500 yards, he caught the faint orange glow of engine exhaust. He eased into firing position, lined up in the gun sight, and at 350 yards, squeezed the trigger. A 2-second burst of 20mm fire ripped into the wing. The Betty erupted, rolled over, and plunged into the sea. Time, 23:57. 1 bomber gone. His fuel, though, had already dropped by about 15%. At 0014, a second contact came in. To catch it before it reached the runways, Smith had to push the BlackWidow harder, burning fuel at a punishing rate. He nevertheless overhauled the bomber before it hit the target area, repeated the same disciplined approach, and at 0019, the second Betty was tumbling into the ocean. Now his fuel sat at around 42%.
Watch it go through some of its paces.
The third contact
to see if you can spot it on the move, catching whatever features you can as it goes by.
The pilot
Better still, learn to recognize the whole plane as a unique shape in the sky.
Nakajima Key,
The P-61.
49 Helen. Faster and better defended than the G4M.
Protuberant nose,
with a tail gunner
stepped up
who could
front of
break
crew
anything
nacelle.
foolish enough to sit dead astern. Smith angled in from below,
Teaching a lesson in
off to the
recognition.
side, exploiting the bomber's poor entry coverage.
To the enemy.
At 0029, after a longer, riskier burst, the Helen was burning its way down through the clouds. Smith's fuel had dropped further into the critical high 20s. The fourth bomber was coming in low and close, too close to Muro to delay. Smith dove, using gravity instead of throttle, and closed in fast. Another Betty flying as if unaware anything stalked it from behind. One precise attack later, at 0035, it too was gone. But his fuel was now about 23%. The remaining 8 Japanese bombers turned back. The night's main threat had been broken. The mission, at least on paper, was complete until a new blip popped up. At 0042, Porter detected a single-engine aircraft between Smith and the airfield. With his fuel margin razor-thin, Smith still turned toward it. When he finally saw the silhouette, it was a Nakajima Ki 84 Frank, one of Japan's best fighters. Faster, more agile, and with a better climb than the P-61. In daylight, a skilled Frank pilot could make short work of a lumbering twin-engine night fighter. But this wasn't daylight, and the Japanese pilot had no radar. He was effectively blind. Smith slipped in below and behind, just as he had with the bombers. Fighters were smaller, harder to hit, and better protected, so he closed to 300 yards. His fuel gauge was sinking towards 17%. If he missed, there would be no second attempt. He held his nerve, steadied the target in his sight, and unleashed a 3-second burst. The shells tore through the Frank's tail and engine. Flames blossomed from the nose. The fighter rolled and dove. At about 3,000 feet, Smith saw the pilot bail out, his parachute blooming white in the black sky. The wrecked fighter hit the water around 0046. Smith now had roughly 15% fuel left. no room for mistakes. He turned for McGuire Field. The runway lighting consisted of little more than a line of oil lamps. And just as he prepared to land, every one of them went dark at once. With no visual cues, a night landing became almost impossible. At that altitude, in that darkness, the ground could reach up and smash the plane before he even sensed it. Porter suggested relying on the radar altimeter and dead reckoning. Smith had no choice. Another airfield was too far. He had run out of fuel long before reaching it. So he lined up as best he could, trusted his instruments, and began a blind descent toward where he believed the runway lay. 600 feet, 400 feet, 200. The altimeter ticked down, while outside the cockpit remained ink black. At 0059, the main wheels slammed into crushed coral. The landing was hard, but survivable, and the gear held. The nose wheel followed seconds later. Smith braked until the P-61 came to a full stop. When he checked the fuel gauge, it showed about 6%, enough for perhaps 3 more minutes in the air. 63 minutes of combat, 5 intercepts, 5 kills, 1 landing in absolute darkness. The next afternoon, Smith and Porter went up again. Japanese reconnaissance fighters were probing the area. At 15:12, Porter picked up another contact, a Key 84 Frank at 12,000 feet. This time, Smith held the altitude advantage and dove on the target, using gravity to exceed the Frank's level flight top speed. At 400 yards, he fired a tight 2-second burst that shattered the fighter's engine and sent it spiraling into the sea. That was his 7th confirmed kill, all achieved in less than 24 hours of flying, enough to make him the top-scoring American night fighter ace of the war. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron finished the war with 18 enemy aircraft destroyed. 7 of those belonged to Smith, roughly 39% of the unit's total. After the war, he returned to the United States, left the service, and faded quietly into civilian life. He didn't chase publicity, didn't publish memoirs. The story of that night over Muro survived mostly in dry reports, mission logs, kill confirmations, intelligence summaries. The P-61 BlackWidow, meanwhile, had proven what a true night fighter could do. About 700 were built and served across nearly every theater: Europe, the Pacific, China, Burma, India, the Mediterranean. They dominated the night skies from 1944 to 1945. Post-war redesignated F-61s carried on for a few more years before being retired in favor of jet-powered interceptors. Smith's aircraft, its nose art and kill markings, was eventually scrapped like most of its sisters. But on that December night in 1944 over Muro, the BlackWidow was the most advanced night fighter in the sky. And Carroll C. Smith was the man who turned it into a legend.
If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe to Traces of Valor. Your support keeps these forgotten heroes alive. And tell us, what did this story make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.